Welcome back to another conversation. So this one is, I think people would have known it was coming because I actually mentioned that I wanted. So that I'm speaking today with Terry Grigg, and I think some people will know that this one was coming because I recently did an episode of antinatalism around the world where I talked to people who are antinatalist in different countries, and I did one for the UK. And as I was going through sort of, notable figures of, from the UK in the sort of antinatalist world, Terry's name came up. And I mentioned that I wanted to, get him on and sort of hear about his story and the things that he's sort of done and experienced and stuff. So, yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. So I think maybe actually, before I go into my proper questions, can you just give like a very brief overview of, um, how you sort of how you became antinatalist? And actually, before, did you start traveling first, or did you become antinatalist first? Which way round was it?
I think I've always been anti-natalist, even before I knew what the term meant. I've never had a desire to have children. I'm not comfortable with that kind of setup.
Mm,
And I think it just developed over time. And eventually you find out what the word antinatalist means. But
yeah.
I think it's from a very young age that uh, it wasn't something I was really interested in. But obviously the campaigning and the actual and writing about it and all the rest of it, that obviously came much later. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
deep feeling inside me is that somehow this world was not a very pleasant place. It wasn't a very nice place. And why the hell did people bring children into it?
Yeah, see, it's interesting how people get to it. Some people just have an intuitive sort of
Yeah.
sense, and other people, it's a specific experience or a specific, argument or something that someone puts to them. And I was that sort of person. I never had this intuitive
Oh,
sense.
okay.
I was very much natalist before, and
All
then I
right.
just sat down and had a conversation with someone about it. They explained it to me, and I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, well, that makes sense." So then I changed my mind, but I
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah, I didn't have this sort of intuitive sort of sense about it. Um, okay, cool. So you became antinatalist first. So why did you start traveling then?
Um, as a form of escapism, because I found lots of people have addictions to various things, like obviously with drugs and
Mm,
and and actually with having children is a drug, really. It is an addiction. And I just wanted to find out what the world was about. Perhaps it's either going to reinforce my views, which it has over time, or I was thinking, oh, okay, the world isn't such a bad place after all, and just perhaps
mm,
it's just my individual living circumstances that are bad, or perhaps because I originally come from Kent, southeast London, perhaps
mm,
just that overcrowded area which is bad, and if I get away, then life will be rosy.
mm,
But although other places were probably quite a bit better than where I grew up, um, it certainly wouldn't what I would regard as rosy. And I
mm,
think my views have just been reinforced over time. And as I say, I wouldn't say I was actually anti-natalist per se when I was young, because I don't think I was really aware of the term.
mm,
But suppose I was child free, and I never had a desire to have children. And it wasn't really till later that I realised that yes, I wanted to campaign and I wanted to get involved and I wanted to sort of put my views across to a wider audience.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting. You said you come from Southeast London because I'm from Southeast London as well, and I'm
Oh,
there at the moment. So I can see growing up in Southeast London, I can see why you got to the conclusion that you did.
yes. Yeah, yeah, I can understand. And it's much worse now than it was 20, 30 years ago when I used to live in that part of the world.
There's a lot of people here now. There's more people, but certain parts of it have become gentrified now,
Yes.
which itself has its own issues because it
Oh,
pushes
of
people
course.
out
Yeah.
who can't afford it,
Yeah.
and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just for anyone listening that doesn't know what gentrified means, it's basically when a an area, usually in a city, but it's not always in a city, but an area basically, a lot of people with higher incomes than the people who live there move in. They do the properties up. and then they either live in them or sell them. But it basically means that there's an influx of people with higher incomes. It causes the property prices to go up, and then the people who actually lived there originally can't afford it anymore, so they get pushed out. And it's happening a lot in different areas of the UK.
Yeah,
Um,
especially the southeast, obviously. Yeah.
yeah, especially the southeast. Yeah, yeah. So, how extensive has your traveling been? I know you've written a few books on different parts of the world that you've traveled in, but um, both the areas that you've included in your books, but also just your general traveling. Like, how extensive has it been?
I've spent years travelling, basically. If you add it all up, several years
Yeah.
travelling. Yeah. Well, I've been travelling since my twenties, early twenties, when I just travelled around Europe when I was younger, and I went to the States as well, and then I went to Europe, and then it just expanded from there.
Mm,
Um, but I've written 4 books in total, and basically it covers most of the world apart from Antarctica, which I've never been
mm,
to, and I haven't really done that much travelling in the Americas. And it was when the coronavirus thing broke. That was when I was going to start travelling more in the Americas.
mm.
But I've done a lot of travelling in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and in Africa.
Mm. What made you start putting pen to paper? Because obviously there are, a certain amount of people who enjoy traveling and so do it, but it's different to actually put pen to paper. Yeah, okay, people journal, but
Mm,
you're actually writing proper books, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
you're then trying to put them out to an audience. What made you
yeah.
start doing that?
I've always been a writer. Since I was a teenager, I've written poems and then short stories, and then I've written novels, mainly dystopian novels,
Yeah.
which none of which are published and would need a huge amount of work on them to actually get them in a publishable state.
Mm,
They're pretty rubbish actually. But some of the poems, some of the things are okay. But yeah, and then it just evolved. I started travelling, um, and then I thought, yeah, why not instead of writing about writing novels, why not write travelogues and memoirs and that kind of thing. So yeah, it just evolved.
mm. And how has it been while you've been traveling? Um, how has it been like how has being an antinatalist and vegan sort of changed the way that you've sort of viewed your experience of going around the world, and seeing, you know, different parts of the world that are at different levels of economic development, or however you want to put it, different cultures, different social attitudes. Like, how has your sort of antinatalist and vegan lens sort of influenced the way that you have traveled and seen things?
Um, I don't know. I haven't really changed as such. It's just I think it's just reinforced my existing views. Um,
Mm,
I was vegetarian for many years. And then back in the 90s, I actually worked at a place called Animal Tracks, which is in Devon, which is an animal sanctuary looking after animals that have been abused and have been in
mm,
the farm system, run by a guy called John Hicks, who sadly passed on not so long ago. And he was the chairman of the League Against Cruel Sports,
yeah.
chairman or whatever, I think. Um, and yeah, it just as I say, I was vegetarian for a long time and eventually became vegan. And obviously, seeing things in around the world, and which I've mentioned in my book, just reinforced that. And I'm thinking, well, somebody's got to make a stand. And, it may be a very small thing I did, but it was just what I saw around the world, the way animals were treated, and in some places pretty badly.
Mm,
Just a build up. It wasn't like any sort of eureka moment
mm,
um, where I saw a particular film. It was just a build up over a period of time. Say, I was vegetarian up until into the 90s, really, I suppose, and then turn of the century, and I slowly evolved then from vegetarianism into veganism.
mm. And what about antinatalism? Like, as you've been traveling around the world,
Mm,
did because you said before that you'd already had those sort
yeah,
of intuitive
yeah,
feelings,
yeah, yeah.
um, and then but maybe you didn't have like a term or something to attach it to. Um, did you were saying that as you traveled around the world, it sort of increased your feelings or
Yes,
confirmed
yeah.
them? Like, what was it that you saw as you were traveling around that confirmed your or strengthened your antinatalist feelings?
I think India is the country that is immediately
Mm,
would reinforce the view that there are just too many humans.
mm,
It's vastly overpopulated, a huge amount of poverty, a lot of civil strife, a lot of religious intolerance. Um, and yeah, India will blow you away. You could go to places like Thailand or Vietnam, and you see a certain amount of things going on. But yeah, India is another step beyond, really.
mm.
And I think I first went to India in the early '90s, and every time I go back, there's always some problem. And at the moment, the pollution is absolutely horrendous. You know, you
Mm.
can hardly. I think there's something like, I don't know if the actual figure is right. Is it something like 30,000 a year? People a year dying in Delhi alone from pollution,
Oh, air pollution.
air pollution. Yeah, I think it might even be more than that. And I know various flights have been cancelled to India because the pollution is so bad. It is horrendous. I know China is bad as well. But
Mm.
obviously, with China and India being the two world's most populated countries and the biggest, obviously, um, that is where you're going to get, most of the information on
Mm.
on population growth and so forth.
Yeah, I've actually been to both China and India, and I went to China when I think I was like 15 years old,
Yeah,
and it was myself and a friend, and we stayed with his family because he's Chinese.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but he went to school in the UK. That's how I knew him.
Okay.
And I was staying with his family in Beijing, and the pollution was so bad there that there were two like big things I noticed. The first one was that the government, and this is very authoritarian. The government had just sort of banned people from driving more than I think it
Yeah.
was 2 days a
Right.
week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everyone who had a car, so they'd buy their car, and
Yeah.
then they were given an allowance of 2 days out of the 7 days in a week where you could drive. So, for example, my friend's father, maybe he would buy a car and it's like, okay,
Mm.
you can drive on Mondays and Wednesdays. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anything you need to do that involves driving, you do it on those days. So we actually had to plan when we flew into Beijing to
Mm.
coincide with one of the days he could drive so that he could
Right.
pick us up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they obviously have cameras everywhere so that if you drive on a day you're not allowed to, your registration gets picked up and you get sent a fine or whatever the
Yeah.
system is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I noticed was, so his family lives in a tower block in Beijing, um, I mean, there's so many tower blocks there.
Oh, yeah.
Presumably, most people live
I
in tower
know.
blocks.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we were sort of I'm not, maybe 2/3 of the way up the tower block,
Yeah.
and the pollution was so thick on some days that you would stand on the balcony and it would just be fog. It would be
Mm.
like fog, but it wasn't natural fog, it was pollution.
Yeah.
And we would wear slippers indoors because if you went barefoot indoors,
Mm.
the pollution stuck to the floor
Mm.
and your feet would just turn black.
God.
So that was my first introduction to like
Yeah.
really bad air
That, that
quality.
was terrible. Yeah. Yeah. I've had it pretty, but perhaps not quite as bad as that. But
Mm,
it's where you. I know in Delhi. And it's all the stubble, but not just the traffic pollution, but they
mm.
burn stubble after they use their the farmland when they grow crops and they have to burn the stubble. And
What
that
what
and that
what stubble? Do you mean it's just sort of like
it's
organic
the husk.
matter that's left
It's
over?
the remains of the rice crop or
Oh,
whatever
right,
they
cool.
had,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
just burn it. And that's a huge amount of pollution.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was choking when I was there in Delhi.
Mm,
Yeah, it was bad. It was very bad, and you had all this pollution around all the monuments. You couldn't get a good picture like, the Red Fort or
Mm.
anything. And even as far as the Taj Mahal, even that, it was very, although it was a clear sunny day, there was this sort of fog that sort of, that enveloped the city.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I went to India, I was down in the south, in sort of Kerala, Tamil Nadu
Yeah, yeah, I know.
area,
Yeah.
and I spent some time in the cities, and there was this sort of haze of pollution. But the thing I noticed is like you were saying, there's just so many people. It's like
Yes.
wherever you go, even if you go into the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
there's always someone there. Like
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't, yeah,
Yeah.
you can't go somewhere and then not be
No,
someone there.
no.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the other thing I noticed is there's just temples everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Like religion is so dominant, and yeah, it's
I think I wrote in one of my book, in A Scam in the Ashram book, which is all about India and other
mm.
parts of the South Asian continent. There's only 30,000 atheists
Oh really?
only 30,000 are actually registered in India as atheists.
Oh
That's a
wow.
ridiculously small number. Uh,
Yeah, but I
and
I would.
even of the ones that haven't registered, you're certainly not talking more than 1 million. I wouldn't have thought.
Mm. Yeah, I would guess there are more unregistered than registered, just because I
Mm.
think, like in the UK, I think when it comes to religion, we're relatively lucky.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah.
even though officially we're a religious country, most people, it doesn't really mean much to them. Like they don't really care.
No, no.
Yeah, whereas in other countries, I mean, if someone found out I mean, in some countries you can just get killed if you're an
Well, in some
atheist.
way, like Iran, they're pretty strict on that kind of thing, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've not been to Iran, so I can't actually. I'm not certain on that, but I know that they wouldn't be very. It wouldn't be very looked on very kindly if you said,
Mm.
"Oh, I'm an atheist and I want to actually register being an atheist."
Yeah. So, as you were traveling, did you notice any sort of, so obviously as you were traveling, you were going to be in different cultures, meeting
Yeah,
people
yeah,
who had
yeah.
had been brought up with different sort of beliefs that you just sort of organically get from the culture around you.
Yes, yeah.
Did you, specifically surrounding like procreation and just people's general views on bringing new life into the world, did you notice any sort of variation in the cultures that you like? Were there more cultures that you found which were sort of like extremely pro-natalist, or did you find any that you thought were more sympathetic to antinatalism, or is there not really much variation that you notice?
Um, I think India is pretty pro-natalist in a
Mm,
lot of ways. Like you've got the religious problem in India as well. Like the Hindus complaining that the Muslims are overbreeding,
mm,
so they can have a bigger population percentage of population and all that kind of thing, and vice versa. So there's a bit of religion thrown into it as well. But most of them are pretty pro natalist. I suppose the ones that are more developed, more, I suppose somewhere like Thailand, for example, I would has much better contraception and
mm,
public health in general, and it's a far more up to date and more organised sort of
mm,
country. So yeah, Thailand probably less so, but yeah, I suppose China has its own sort of, obviously with the one child policy
oh
has its own
yeah, yeah.
idea, although all that's gone now. But um, yeah, I think it doesn't just vary; it varies quite a lot from place to place as well. Um, Generally speaking, I suppose the more wealthy, the more well off people
Mm.
become, presumably, I think at the end of the day, probably the fewer children they're likely to have.
Yeah, like because I've not not as much since being antinatalist, but like over the whole of my life, I've traveled to a relatively decent amount of countries,
Mm.
um, and yeah, I wouldn't say, like, at least from my memory, not that at the time, like I was saying, I was not antinatalist when I go into most of these countries, so I wasn't really thinking about this sort of thing
No,
at
no.
all. But looking back on it, I didn't register any sort of The only variation I saw is you're either like like pro-natalist or very pro-natalist. I didn't
Yeah,
find
yeah,
any sort
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
cultures that are sympathetic to antinatalism, and I guess that's because the ones that would have been um, are either very small or so that you'd be less likely to come across them, or they eventually died out.
Mm,
And
mm.
I think that would be different, I think, in the modern day because information spreads so much more
Yes,
easily
yeah,
with the
yeah.
internet.
The internet has changed everything, of
Yeah,
course.
it's a complete game changer. Yeah,
It's a
but
complete
I
change.
guess it's like you were saying, the places that are maybe less extreme pro-natalist are the
Yeah,
ones that are more economically developed, have better healthcare systems. Because I was looking
yeah.
at
That is very true. That is very true.
because I was looking at do you know Our World in Data, the website?
Yes, yes. I've looked at it a few times. Yeah,
So they have a page on fertility rates, and they were saying on there that the since 1965, there's been a sort of like massive drop in birth rates, basically
yeah,
worldwide,
yeah. There has.
um, and they were saying the three key drivers of that were the female empowerment, so basically just
Mm,
women entering
yeah,
the workforce, getting better
definitely. Yeah,
education,
very, very much so.
yeah, infant mortality coming down,
Yeah,
and the cost of having a child going up.
yeah.
So I
That's
guess naturally, all those things are going to happen as somewhere becomes more economically developed.
yeah.
Like like places like South Korea, Japan,
Yes.
Taiwan, they
Yeah,
all have like extremely low birth rates,
yeah, yeah.
they're all quite economically developed. So I think that's a trend that we're going to see, and also in a lot of economically developed countries, the governments are actually trying to make them more pro-natalist with policies that they bring in, and
That's the
often they
problem.
don't work.
That is, yeah, that's good actually. Even
Yeah,
countries
yeah.
like Hungary, for example, is pretty bad in
Mm,
giving all these baby bonuses to
mm,
people that have four kids and that, you know. And even America as well, I think is very pro-natalist by
yeah.
like banning abortion and all this kind of thing.
Mm,
So America, I would put almost down as an undeveloped country, in
mm,
my view, and its attitudes towards
mm,
women and towards natalism. I would say it's almost like an undeveloped country.
mm. What do you
That's
think?
another subject because I haven't been to
Yeah,
America
yeah.
very much, so I can't really comment too much. But what comes out of America is quite unsettling on a
Mm,
range of issues, of course.
mm. And what do you because I mean, I've got my own like answer to this just off the back of what we've been saying, but like from traveling round, what do you think is the sort of key so because there's a difference between the actual birth rate and then people's attitude towards procreation, right? What do
Yes,
you think is the what do you think from traveling around the world, being exposed to different places, is the sort of key thing that drives people's attitude towards procreation? Because the thing that we've been talking about, I think most, has been religion. Would you say religion is the key thing, or do you think there's something else that sort of really drives people's attitude towards procreation?
I think procreate. Well, religion is part of it, but certainly in more undeveloped societies, it's getting the number of children to work the land. That was
Mm,
that was the original reason. That's why there was a lot of children because they need to work the land or do construction of buildings and all that kind of thing. Um, yeah. The other driver is the very selfish one of wanting to have a mini me.
yeah,
And
true.
you know,
Yeah.
that happens in every society, regardless of the economic situation.
Mm, mm,
Uh, to have and to have a sort of like a plaything that they can have as a toy almost,
mm.
and that is a very selfish, extremely selfish attitude, and is prevalent in a lot of parents. The fact
Yeah.
that they can have control over something and treat it as a toy,
Mm,
um, or to work the land, or to be a slave for them.
mm, mm.
So parental attitudes really. Uh,
Yeah, and I think
a selfish gene, I suppose, that they want to just keep perpetuating their genes.
yeah, no, I know, and
They're
I,
the
I think
three basic things.
yeah, and I think. it probably is the last one, the biological one you're talking about, that probably is the biggest one, just because there's 4.5 billion years of evolution,
Yes,
that is just in there in our monkey
yes,
brain,
and yeah, yeah.
that is driving us to do that, right?
Mm.
And it's hard to fight against, I think, for most people, because it's
Yeah,
just so base.
it's something I've never had. Say from early age, I
Mm,
never knew what it was called, but I never had this great urge
mm,
to procreate. And I thought, well, what right have I to impose life on, on a sentient being, and that, knowing
mm,
that that sentient being could suffer.
mm,
And that's been in my mind. And as I said, I didn't even know the word antinatalism, but um, that didn't really come about until really probably, yeah, much later in my life. But
mm,
I just never had, and I never had that kind of desire. Why would I want something running around, causing mayhem around me? That to me will be more hassle than uh, than a benefit.
mm. And
So
when
that's a personal view.
mm. And when you were traveling around, did you come across many antinatalists? Did you ever, you know, sort of post in Facebook groups or whatever, saying, "Oh, I'm traveling to this country. If any, if anyone wants to meet up," or did you just come across people like, yeah, when you were traveling around, did you at all interact with any other antinatalists?
A lot of my travelling was done even well before I went onto Facebook. A lot of it was in the late '90s
Mm,
and early 2000s. The good years of travelling, because I
mm,
think before the internet held sway, I think travelling was a much better experience. It's more spontaneous.
mm,
Um, but yeah, what would happen actually is that I used to get a lot of people coming up to me rather than me going up to them. If I was on my own, which I was most of the time. I did occasionally go around with groups. If I was going up a mountain or something, we might get together and go up a hill, a mountain, or go somewhere together for
mm,
a few days. But a lot of the time I was on my own. People would often come up and talk to me, people that didn't fit into society. Like there was an atheist in India, for example, who came up and he was really slagging off Hinduism left, right, and centre.
mm.
And I had a really good conversation talking, and this was in a temple, chatting to him for a couple of hours about Hinduism and all the rest of it. And then in Malaysia, I was chatting to some Chinese people, and how badly they were treated by the Malay government,
Mm,
and also Hindus in Malaysia, and they said they were badly treated by the Hindus. Oh, I've done this, I've ruined the forests, I've chopped down all the trees, I don't care about our environment and all the rest of it. So you often, if you're on your own, even if you don't always have to make the first move, because people will come up and talk to you, and they
mm,
will want to know what your view is on a whole range of things, and they somehow feel that you can somehow influence their government over something. Or
mm.
they want you to sort of say, "Oh, as a visitor, I didn't like this or I didn't like that."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's lots of people that are quite interesting. That, or you might just come across people in the street that have a conversation.
Mm. And did you have you like what whilst traveling? Did you talk about antinatalism much? Did it come up in conversation? What were people's reactions like?
It did with some people. I do remember chatting to quite a lot of Buddhist monks, for example. This is
Yeah,
a real, they're real font of information, and I'm talking about real Buddhist monks, not fake people. There's
yeah.
lots of fakes around, but in Buddhist monasteries in Thailand and
Mm,
in Burma in particular, I had some fantastic conversations with people with monks in Burma and also
mm,
Vietnam, um, and and they spoke perfect English. They're
mm,
very clever. Some very intelligent people become monks, I think, and
mm,
that was where I got a lot of my information was going into monasteries and just chatting
mm.
to monks.
What were those conversations like? You said they were amazing. Like what were the conversations like, and why do you think you had the amazing conversations with Buddhist monks specifically?
Well, because I agreed with a lot of their views.
Mm,
Certainly on being vegan and vegetarianism. Not all Buddhists are vegan, by the way. Obviously, I discovered that some
mm,
are, some aren't. It's a bit like Hinduism. Some Hindus are definitely not vegetarian or vegan, where some are. but the Mahayana sect of Buddhism is basically vegan or at least vegetarian, and in Burma, a lot of them are vegetarian, vegan in the monks.
Mm,
And yeah, I had some really great conversations with some, and they did talk quite openly about the repression in Burma, and not all people in Burma are bad. I've met some of the best people, most interesting people in Burma. Actually, it's one of my favourite places, and it's not all repression. It's the
mm,
army against civilians, basically. So it's a police state, if you like. But some of the actual people, if you get talking to them, I had some really good conversations.
mm. And did you find that some of the Buddhist, because I think Buddhist monks don't, they don't um, procreate, right? Isn't that one of the things they do? They're not supposed to procreate.
They don't have yeah, they don't have sexual relations, so therefore they're not going to procreate. Although some Buddhists in Thailand, for example, they do Buddhism like a trial run. They
Yeah.
do Buddhism for a couple of years, and then if they don't like it or I think it's not the right thing, then they'll go on to do something else. But
Mm.
yes, obviously the ones that remain Buddhist monks are going to be celibate.
Mm. And did you find that any of them, because obviously, if they're a Buddhist monk and they're celibate, then obviously they're going to be child free. But did you find that any of them were actually antinatalist themselves and disagreed with other people, like creating new people?
No, I don't. I don't think they would disagree. It's just a stand they would make for their own personal
Yeah.
situation. I don't. I didn't really get involved in that depth, probably, perhaps, of
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation that they would be against procreation of others. But yeah, all of them who were monks for the rest of their lives, basically, or certainly for a very long time,
Mm.
would not have sexual relations, so therefore they would not have children. And um, yeah, I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there are some that have that view,
Mm.
but I wouldn't say I actually got into that depth. Well, I got
Yeah.
involved in a lot of deep conversations, but probably when I was in Burma like 20 years ago, whereas
Mm.
now I probably would bring the subject up. 20
Mm.
years
Mm.
ago, I wasn't so clued in to actually the principles of antinatalism. I knew I didn't
Yeah.
want children myself, child free. Um, but 20 odd years ago, yeah, I probably didn't go into antinatalism in sort of any great depth.
Yeah, no. The reason I ask is it's interesting because I did a introduction to Buddhism and meditation course here in London at the London Buddhist Centre. I don't know if you know it in Bethnal Green,
I haven't got
and
that. I
what one of the questions I asked them is because one of the key things that took away from this course anyway is that in Buddhism, obviously the thing that you want to do is get as close to enlightenment as you can through
yeah,
things like
yeah, yeah,
meditation and mindfulness, and
yes, yeah,
abiding by their five pillars and stuff,
exactly.
and and it seemed like one of the driving forces for reaching enlightenment is essentially to overcome suffering.
Yes.
um, and so at the end of the course I sort of went up to one of the teachers that taught us, because we had two, and I asked her, is there a sort of is there a an abundance of people in Buddhism that disagree with procreation? Because it seems like if the whole point is to reach enlightenment, and to reach enlightenment is to sort of get past suffering, surely it's not much of a step to then say, oh well, I just won't put someone in that position where they suffer in the first place, so that
Mm.
they then have to go through the rigmarole of enlightenment and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
um but I don't think she'd really thought about it. I just got a standard sort of natalist line that
yeah,
anyone
yeah,
off the
yeah,
street would say, So I was just interested to see if any of the sort of monks
yeah.
that you'd spoken
I
to.
when I said they spoke good English, it's you. That is to a point. It's perhaps getting into a really in-depth conversation on
Mm,
antinatalism. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. I think the guy I spoke to, I think, was pretty that way inclined, but we
yeah.
didn't actually discuss antinatalism. There was one guy in Vietnam, and the people call him the Mad Monk. I've forgotten where. I think it's somewhere in South Vietnam. I can't remember exactly where, and he said a lot of people, who are Christians or Buddhists, he said a lot of them are. I said, well, why don't they believe this or that? And he said, oh, a lot of them are hypocrites, and they just use the religion as a crutch.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you've got a fair percentage of people that so-called follow Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, and it's just a crutch for them,
Mm.
and they don't really believe, because there's a lot of antinatalist stuff in the Bible, of course, but people don't follow it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't actually know that much about antinatalism in different religions, and I want to have like conversations with a few people about it to explore it more. But yeah, I've heard from quite a few people that quite a lot of religions have.
Yes,
Yeah.
and obviously with Islam as well, I think there's quite a lot of antinatalism there. It's not a subject that's really um, sort of come up that much. I
Mm.
always mention it to people when somebody says, "Oh, I am a Christian," I'll start quoting to them various antinatalism parts. I say, "Oh, it's taken out of context." I said, "Well, they always say that." I said, "Well, so,
Yeah.
so do other people take it out of context. What do you mean by context? Do you mean you have to read a whole chapter, a whole verse, a
Mm.
whole psalm, or whatever? Do you have to read the whole damn thing to get the
Mm.
context? If you read a couple of sentences and it's antinatalism and it's promoting antinatalism, then as far as I'm concerned, that's it. You
Mm.
know,
Mm.
um,
Yeah, a lot of people treat religion like a buffet. They just sort of go up
yes,
and
they do.
take what they, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. They do, they do. That
yeah, and
it's like
my view is
overusing the
like,
crutch. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, and it's like if you're gonna do that, you might as well just invent your own religion with
exactly.
those. There's
Yes.
no point. Like, why would you? It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, if anything, the fundamentalists are
Mm,
the ones actually taking it seriously.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I think, to be honest, I think the whole thing is bollocks. Just throw it all out. I think the fundamentalists are wrong,
Mm.
but at least they're sticking to the book. Do you get what I mean? It's like, whereas
Well,
if you're gonna treat it like a buffet, it's just like, what's the point?
well, I treat it like a buffet because I'm not a Christian.
Mm,
Um, but on the other hand, I wouldn't say I'm an atheist, because there's a lot of atheists in my view that almost treat nature as a religion. Like
yeah, that's true.
Dawkins, for example, would go on about nature being wonderful and all the rest of it, whereas nature is pretty horrendous. So,
Yeah.
so I'm not really atheist. I call myself a free thinker, and
Mm,
I think there's parts of the Bible I quite like, and I would compare them to, say, like Shakespeare, for example, or
mm,
Dickens. It's a book. Some of it is probably true, some of it is fictional, some of it, the truth is sort of modified or it's
mm,
massaged in some way. But I wouldn't just discard the Bible or be vindictive or nasty towards somebody because they're a Christian. I would say,
mm,
well, look, here, give me your views and we'll discuss it.
mm,
And So I'm not an atheist. I don't just totally think all the everything. There are some quite interesting passages in the Bible.
mm. So go into your books.
Hmm.
How much do you mention antinatalism and veganism in your books?
Again, it's grown basically. The first one, which is Backpacking with a Bun, which is Southeast Asia, it's mainly a backpacking memoir. It's lots of backpacking tales on the road, and so forth. Um, and then my last book, the one which is being published at the moment, is called The Dark Heart of Humanity. Well, you can
Mm,
read into that. It's quite a dark theme. And so they've gradually got more pessimistic as I've got
mm,
older, of course. And as you get older, you get more sort of pessimistic anyway. And
mm,
and antinatalism is covered far more. But they all have a theme of antinatalism. There's a theme there, just that it's almost like a bubbling brook in a
mm.
mountain. It started off, and now I'm at the sort of into the estuary that's flowing into the sea.
Yeah, yeah.
As each book becomes darker, and I think the world has become a darker place over the last 20 odd years.
Mm,
It's become a more of a frightening place and a more dangerous place, and obviously a far more overcrowded place.
mm.
We seem to
So
be going up 1 billion people every 3 or 4 years now.
yeah, I know. Tell me about it.
I
So what
don't know the exact statistics, but I think we're well over 8 billion now. I think.
Yeah, we reached 8 billion. I think it was a few months ago
Yeah,
now.
so I was probably near at nine
But I
billion.
mean, yeah, exactly. That's 8 billion people who are known about, who are recorded,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
It's. There's obviously lots of other people that have been missed off the list.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you mentioned the Dark Heart of Humanity.
Dark Heart of Humanity. Yeah.
Is that actually out now, available for people to read? Because I did see it on your Amazon page.
Yes, it is and it isn't. I think I sort of mistakenly published it in error. um, no, the cover has got to be changed. I'm not happy with the cover, so I'm changing the cover a bit. So I like the photographs, but the
Yeah,
actual wording, I've got to get that sorted.
yeah.
And I'm updating the script at the moment. It's going to be some minor amendments that need to be done.
Mm,
I think I put it there, and I can't be bothered to take it off because it's readable. It's a readable book, and but it's got to have a few improvements on it.
mm,
So it should be ready definitely within a month.
yeah.
And then
And
I'll start advertising it.
what it what is this one about? Can you give us like a general sort of overview of what is that book? Because I think the name, The Dark Heart of Humanity, is going to interest a lot of
Yeah,
people, especially.
it's
Yeah.
designed to sort of it's obviously it's about Africa, and it's
Mm,
off from Heart of Darkness. It's all about where humans evolved,
mm,
and wasn't it such a dreadful mistake?
mm,
You go right back to well, the original, which was the transition from the ape to man, was a creature called Australopithecus, and there's layers, and goes on to eventually onto Homo sapiens and
mm,
people standing upright and so forth. So I've put a lot of that into the book. There's a lot about human evolution in the book. So it's not just my books have evolved beyond just a memoir or a backpacking tale. They're now evolving into sort of like this is the evolution of humanity because I've been to Ethiopia and I've been to Kenya and I've been to Tanzania where it all began,
mm,
and and it just shows the development and then what humans have gone on to done, all the horrors that they've gone on to done, and various things I've seen in Africa are quite horrific. And I've read
mm,
lots of stuff about Africa. Um, Obviously, with the slave trade, that was horrific. And then there's obviously there's the Arab slave trade, the Ottoman slave trade. There's local slave groups. There's things like fetishes in West Africa where animals are killed. They have these animal fetishes. Um, there's different tribal conflicts like the Rwanda genocide, and it goes on. And obviously, another thing is in Ethiopia with the famine and Mengistu and all the civil war in Ethiopia. It really is, as so many countries in Africa, is an absolute horror story
mm,
of suffering and calamity, not just by colonialisation, but by intertribal sort of conflicts.
mm, mm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I clicked on I like had a little look at the book before this and was looking through the table of contents and the the different
Yeah,
chapters and
yeah, yeah.
sections, and it looked like it. I mean, I didn't have enough time to read it before
No,
this, but
no.
I intend to read it because it looks pretty. But I'll wait until you've
Wait, yeah,
done the updated bit.
wait until it's fully sorted. As I say, I'm not
Mm,
advertising it at the moment, so normally, no, I haven't had any sales, so normally I'd know that. But yeah, it will be ready within a month, and
mm,
the finalised version with a decent cover. It takes ages to get the cover sorted out,
mm.
and yeah, that'll be my latest book.
How do you how does the actual process work of getting it? Because are all your books on Amazon? So do you then is it self publishing?
It's self publishing. I did go the first one, Backpacking with the Bunion, did go via an agency, which I probably regret because it's more like vanity publishing,
Mm,
which you get ripped. Well, you can get ripped off a lot. I don't think I was ripped off too much, but some people can be ripped off a lot. But anyway,
mm,
that was before Kindle came along, and then Kindle and Amazon came along, and I thought, right, I'm going to self-publish because I have hundreds of rejection letters from
mm,
when my first book, Backpacking with the Bunion. I've had hundreds of rejection letters. It's almost like going for a job and you get loads of rejections. It's just a nightmare trying to get it published, in the mainstream and
mm.
or even going through a literary agent. So yeah, I go on Kindle and so you can look at it electronically or you can buy the paperback.
Oh, so there are paperbacks because I
There
was
will
looking.
be, yes, there will be paperbacks.
Oh, okay.
I
And
like
then,
paperbacks because actually,
mm,
when I proofread, I can proofread much better on a printed book than I can on a computer screen.
mm,
But yes, I do it on the screen as well. I keep reading it and reading it and reading it, and there's always something I need to change.
yeah, yeah. No,
Uh,
I get what you mean, and I prefer physical books as well. I
yes,
mean,
yes,
what
and I
one
know.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, what one thing is like, I just don't like reading on a screen, to be honest. But
no,
also, I was talking to a friend the other day, and you know how there's a sort of, I'm not sure if this is like something that has happened a lot, but I would imagine but I would imagine not as much as recently, because obviously we didn't have electronic books before.
yeah,
But
yeah,
like now there's the ability, if everyone is reading stuff in electronic form,
mm,
uh if a power that be wants to, they can change information. But once you get a physical book, you've got the physical book,
yes,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and I don't know if
Oh, yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I don't know if you saw recently, there was some people, I think they're called like sensitivity readers or something like this.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes. I know that I've heard about them. Yeah,
yeah, and they went through and changed Roald Dahl's.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And this was happening recently. I was talking to my friend,
I know.
um, and it's just like, if that's going to be becoming more common, you actually want to buy physical books more, because once you've got them, they can't be changed, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's good that stuff is in paperback as well.
Yeah, so my paperbacks, obviously I've got several copies of my own here, and they are all over the world. My
Mm,
paperbacks, in various places. So yeah, it's very difficult to destroy an idea if it's in print, as you say.
mm.
On If somebody gets control of Amazon, they can just wipe out a whole book just like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Or, or,
exactly. Yeah.
or, or as you say, it could manipulate it in some way, and
Mm.
that is the black side of the the internet. So some good things about the internet, but there's a heck of a lot of stuff which I think is pretty nasty about the
Yeah.
internet.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think the internet's very good because it's democratized the ability for people to put out and gain information, but you have to be it that if it's democratized and decentralized,
Mm,
not fully, obviously, some of it is still quite centralized, but
yeah,
in theory, stuff can be democratized and decentralized. But that means that, well, actually, you have to be wary about what information you're getting,
yeah.
and who's controlling it and stuff like that. But actually, you had to do that before, because even when you just got your news from one TV channel or the newspaper, you still had to be skeptical of it, because it was
Oh
just
yeah,
someone feeding you something. So I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
actually it hasn't changed that much. Um,
It's just well, it's a many headed hydra, I suppose. But
mm.
it's just basically magnified even more than it was before.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Was I mean, I guess this doesn't, because you're self-publishing, this doesn't really apply that much, but was it a at least a consideration when you were thinking about going into self-publishing, that, because I can imagine if you're going to be talking about antinatalism more,
Mm,
it might be harder to get stuff published. Now, obviously, there are antinatalist books out there.
yes.
Like a famous one like David Benatar's
Yeah,
Better
yeah,
Never to Have
yeah, yeah.
Been. But he's an academic. He's got notoriety around the world, all of this sort of stuff. Whereas someone who's writing a personal book about, traveling with
Yeah.
also some message, it, it's not on the same level,
No,
and
no.
so it might be harder for someone else who's working on that sort of project to get something with the same sort of message, um, put into it, actually published.
Yeah, I think we people come at it from all different angles. Yeah, with certainly with Benatar, it's definitely a philosophical angle, isn't it? And obviously
Mm,
an academic angle. And then you get somebody like Ligotti, Conspiracy Against the Human Race. I don't know if you've
mm,
read that, but that is more theatrical, more
mm,
descriptive, almost like a novel in places. That's a
mm,
different way of approaching the subject. And then you've got something like Jim Crawford, um, Confessions of an Antinatalist. That's more comedic.
mm,
Um, and then you have somebody like Gary Mendham, who I don't know if you've heard of Gary Mendham. He's a
mm,
prolific YouTuber, who done the Gladiator War, and that is just classic antinatalist rhetoric and
Mm,
description and so forth. So people come at it from a different angle, and I think that's good. I like the idea that different people. I suppose somebody like Benatar's got the edge because he's obviously got, presumably, some kind of establishment backing behind him if he's
yeah.
philosopher, professor of philosopher in Cape Town.
Mm,
So he's actually got a bit of kudos, hasn't he?
mm,
Whereas the rest of us probably don't. I think Lagotti's got quite well renowned, but perhaps the rest of us, we're sort of still floundering.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I think it's good that different people have different approaches and different ways of putting up. And I think with mine, I'm incorporating travel with antinatalism and with my experiences around the world of the way the world situation is.
mm. Yeah, no, I agree that it's good to have people coming at it from different perspectives because you know different people are different,
Yeah.
and someone who would connect with the writing that you're doing wouldn't connect with Benatar. Someone who connects with Benatar wouldn't connect with Jim Crawford. Some,
Mm.
etc.
Yeah, yeah,
etc.
etc.,
So
etc. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it's collectively we're able to cast a wider net so
yeah.
that it reaches
I
more
think that's a
people.
good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So moving a bit on from antinatalism, what animal rights stuff have you done? Just in general, not necessarily linked to traveling, just general. You said you worked for a time at a sanctuary.
Yes, I worked at a place called Animal Tracks in Devon, near a place called South Molton in Devon.
Mm,
And yeah, the guy was John Hicks who ran it. He was the president of the League Against Cruel Sports, and yeah, I worked there for a few months, and it was basically just looking after animals that have been neglected or domesticated. A lot of domesticated animals, like sheep and
mm,
horses, goats, and so forth. Um, yeah, there's sort of campaigning as well. And I've done various things. I think I've done quite a lot. I was many years ago. I was in the National Trust with tree planting, that kind of thing.
mm,
Various conservation projects which I've been involved in. Um, but obviously, with the travelling, that's taken precedence. So I've not really done. I've done a lot of petitions and things, lots of things online,
mm.
but nothing really practical recently. As I say, I've done a lot of travelling, so travelling's basically taken over.
Yeah. What while you were traveling, did you ever visit any sanctuaries around the world?
Um, no, I can't think any off the top of my head. I'm sure I
Mm,
did go to one or two. The trouble is, a lot of places around the world, a sanctuary is not the sanctuary as we believe it. It's sort of,
yeah,
sometimes it's just a prison for animals.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I have been to places where like in South Africa, there's a place where some abandoned, some, I don't know, there might be some. I think they had lemurs. I think, and obviously lemurs aren't native to Africa; they are to Madagascar, and they had been ill treated. So they were looking after lemurs, and they had a few other monkeys and other things. Um, but a lot of places you go to in Africa, they call it a conservation thing,
Mm,
but really it's just an animal in a cage. It's like
mm,
just like a zoo, really. Like they might have some cheetahs in there or some leopards or something, and they'll call it a conservation sanctuary or something, and it's little more than a zoo.
mm.
I did have one particular really quite horrendous thing I saw in West Africa. I think it was Togo. I think it was Togo. As a baboon was got in a cage. I mentioned this in my book. Um, there's a baboon in a cage, and I bitterly complained about it to the hotel and to a whole range of other people, tour company, all the rest of it, and various organisers and locals and everything about how this animal's been treated. And they claimed it was well fed and all the rest of it, but it was not nice the way it was cooped up in a small space like that. They said, "Oh, they let it out occasionally."
Mm.
So sometimes the attitude in other countries towards conservation is falls far short of what it would in the UK, and obviously the UK record isn't that brilliant.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and the name sanctuary as well. I've noticed what what a vegan means by sanctuary is very different from what it can be used.
Yeah.
Um, I think some places they use the word sanctuary almost as a PR thing because
Definitely.
it
Yes. Definitely.
sounds
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah, it sounds nicer than petting zoo or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
something like that. Do you get
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I think it makes people feel because I think a lot of people, if they go to another country and they, I don't know, maybe they ride elephants or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I've seen.
I yeah, I think deep down, a lot of people kind of know it's wrong,
Hmm.
and so if the place calls it like an elephant sanctuary, for example, but they're sort of flogging the elephants for elephant rides,
Hmm.
I think it probably eases someone's conscience because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like
That's exactly how it is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
So
I
I
agree
think
with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
the word is exploited a bit.
Yeah. And as I say, you have to be very careful subscribing to these sort of places. That's how come to the cheetah sanctuary or the elephant sanctuary or
Mm,
the baboons or whatever, and you find that they're not being looked after at all well.
mm.
There are some exceptions here and there, but there's a lot of bad guys as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, so before we did this, I listened to your because you've done an interview before, but it was audio only on the Species Barrier radio show, and in that you were speaking about how you were speaking about some of the work you've done surrounding overpopulation,
Yeah.
and you spoke about how politicians and organizations generally are quite resistant to talking
Oh,
about
very,
procreation when
very
you've
much so.
contacted them. Why do you think they are?
Well, they don't think it's a vote winner.
So it's not that they don't think it's an issue; it's just
I don't think they really care as long as they're
yeah,
in power, and if the majority of people was 80, is it something like 80% of childbearing women have children? Is it something like that? If
I don't know.
I think it's something. I think it's something like 80% that have
Mm,
children, and 20%, and even the 20% may not be necessarily child free. They may be childless insofar as they
yeah,
can't have children or whatever, or for whatever reason they haven't had children.
yeah,
The politicians are only interested in their vote, aren't they? And none of them. I actually, this goes back to my political sort of stance. I was actually stood as a councillor in for the Green Party back in the 1990s in Southsea in Hampshire. But I actually left the. I actually got about 600 votes, I think.
mm,
uh, I left the Green Party because their stance on overpopulation was not the same as mine, and
mm,
they were just interested in the votes. And the Green Party, even now, hasn't got a very good policy on overpopulation. They're not really that interested, and they are still very much a natalist mentality, from what I can gather anyway. There might
mm.
be some of them that might be moving in that direction, but yeah. What was the other part of your question? Was about what other things I've done on antinatalism, wasn't it? Something like that.
Well, I mean, have you worked on any other things about
Other thing, well,
antinatalism?
other than yeah, I've done some petitions. If I can, I've actually, if I can remember, this is one. Procreation Rebellion, I call it, discrimination against the child-free and antinatalists,
Mm,
and that was a Care 2 petition in November 2016,
mm,
about the blatant and political institutional discrimination and suggesting areas where law and social attitudes need to change. So back in 2016, and I listed 10 points about the way that what of discrimination against the child. I won't. I probably haven't really got time to go through all 10 points,
yeah,
but
but is the petition still
no,
online?
no, it's not. But they only have a limited time.
Yeah,
It
but
didn't.
I mean, like, not for people to sign, but are the details still online? Because I
Oh, the
think there'll
details
be.
are still online. Oh, yeah, you can go in, and it's called Procreation, Rebellion, Discrimination Against the Child-Free and Antinatalists.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still there, but yeah, they have a time span, but
Yeah.
it wasn't very well received because there's only
Yeah. Well.
473 supporters out with a 1,000 goal. Um, but yeah, I did that. I've written loads of letters. To politicians, to world. I wrote to the leaders of the world's 20th most populous countries, and I've got a list somewhere. I haven't got it.
Oh wow.
Um,
What sort of replies did you get
I
to
got
writing
hardly
to?
any from any, but
Oh.
I did get one from Brazil, and it was all in Portuguese, and I haven't yet. I should put it through. I'll have to put it through Google Translate.
Mm.
I never got round to translating it actually.
Well, if I don't know how long the letter is, but if you want to take it, well, first of all, with the petition, I'll try and find a link to it, and I'll include it in the description.
No, it wasn't. It
Just
wasn't a petition. That one. That
no,
was
no.
better.
I'm talking about
Oh, the
the
oh the
procreation
petition. Yeah,
rebellion one.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
then this letter, I'm assuming it's a physical letter, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Or
So
was it
if
an email? It might have been an email. I can't remember. Might have been that.
okay, well, either way, if you're able to take a photo of it or screenshot it,
Mm.
I can maybe try and find someone who can translate it.
I think I can
Um,
probably translate it on. I think I might have translated it on Google. I think it's a load of wishy-washy stuff, to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
I
it
will
would be,
check.
wouldn't it?
I will check it on Google,
Just a
and
load of political language.
yeah, it was. It was. I don't think there was anything really concrete there.
Yeah, yeah. We appreciate your concerns, but
Yeah,
whatever, blah
it
blah
was
blah.
word of it was on those lines.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't ever did you ever get any so I'm assuming most of the politicians you wrote to were UK politicians, were they?
Yes, they were.
And
Uh,
did you ever get any replies from people that were vaguely sympathetic?
no, no, none. They
Yeah, I
were
wouldn't
all
guess
very
so.
anti.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the. Um, I got comments like being offended, being puzzled, and that I should not look down on parents. That's I haven't got the stuff in front of me, but that's the general kind of attitude I
Yep.
got from politicians. Um,
Mm.
but I sent them to Nicola Sturgeon, and I think it was Theresa May, who was the prime minister at the time,
Mm.
and very one or two in the Labour Party, but one or two others. But it was
Mm.
very much either very indifferent.
Mm.
They as I say, they're interested in votes. It's not. I
Yep.
wouldn't say it's a vote winner. They're not going to sort of countenance any. They're not going to go into detail, are they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If anything, because they want to win votes, they're going to become more pro-natalist, if anything.
Probably, yeah. I think that's the worst place to go as a politician. That they're just as you say, into like popularity they wouldn't go
Mm.
into any. They're not interested in minority issues, basically,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I
that
got
just apply to antinatalists, but to vegans and a whole range of other groups as well.
yeah, yeah. I got an interesting one now. So this one I'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on.
Mm,
So when you were traveling around the world,
mm.
um, obviously once you get in situ, I'm imagining you traveled mostly by either, motorbike or car or train, something like that. But I'm assuming when
Nearly all public transport.
okay,
I didn't do much. I did some cycling. I didn't actually go around on motorbike, but maybe taxis occasionally. But mainly, nearly
yeah.
always on public transport.
How much over the years, how much flying have you done?
Oh, I can't. A lot of my trips have been long trips, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't have involved it once flying there and flying back. Um, I would have spent say a year traveling, or 6 months traveling,
Okay.
3 months
Yeah, I get what you
traveling.
mean. Okay.
I
Because
have, sorry, I have done shorter trips, but
mm,
a lot of the trips, certainly years ago, were very long overland
yeah,
trips.
yeah. Because I I had a question about because obviously as environmentalism
Yeah,
has
yeah, I
become
know.
it's become more sort of a mainstream issue.
Yes, yeah.
And so people have started, one thing people have started to do, although I think this is actually eased off recently, is people started to shame each other for flying.
Yeah,
And I wanted to get your sort of opinion on that.
yeah.
Um,
As I say, I have tried to keep the flying down to a minimum, but obviously, yes, there is that
mm,
impact. I think whatever we do, as soon again, it gets back to the procreation. If you have a
mm,
child, that child will cause pollution. That child will cause, a lot of depletion of land and all the rest of it. We're all guilty in one way or the other. So
mm,
yeah, it's a case of degree, and the only solution is not to procreate, because I know, at
yeah.
least I know, once I die, I will not be causing any more suffering. I won't be causing um, any more problems throughout the world.
Yeah, I get what you mean. And I think actually this sort of shaming culture has actually eased off a bit now
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
the start of like Extinction Rebellion, because they before Extinction Rebellion really kicked off in the UK, most of the narrative around environmentalism was aimed at individual actions, but
Yes, yeah.
Extinction Rebellion really took it away and focused it
Mm,
on systemic forms of change, right? With
mm.
corporations or government and stuff like that. So, you know, whatever you think of Extinction Rebellion, I'm sure both, you know, I have my gripes with them. I'm sure you
Yeah,
have your
I, I,
gripes with
I'm
them.
not a great fan of Extinction.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. But that was one thing I did notice, is that they were relatively successful, or at least they contributed to this happening. I don't know if they are, you know, are the sole cause, but they contributed to a shift in the narrative from focusing on the individual to focusing on the system, which
Yes, yeah.
I think in the when you, if you're just looking at environmentalism, is
Mm,
probably a better avenue to take, because with most things, individual people don't really like being shamed, and it doesn't seem to encourage best. People tend to behave, like change their behaviors based on the incentives rather than getting shamed. It's just a matter of
yeah,
incentives.
yeah. It's a valid,
Yeah.
a valid point. People don't
Mm,
like criticism. Yeah, that's a valid point.
mm. So, apart from the Dark Heart of Humanity at the moment, which you're doing sort of finishing touches on, are there any other projects that you're working on at the moment that are sort of, you know, you're okay to put out into the ether?
Well, I will be writing about the Americas,
Mm,
but I haven't really travelled much in the States or South America. That's one part of the world I haven't really got round to,
mm,
and that was what I was planning just before this coronavirus nonsense kicked off.
mm,
So that's been on hold for the last, because I would have done a lot of travelling probably in South America by now.
mm,
That's what I was planning over the last 3 4 years, because that was the next on the list. I'd done my trip for Africa, gone for, and that was the next place, and so that's been on hold. But yeah, I that will be the next writing project is
mm.
going to be the Americas, but that's going to be that's many years in the future now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
been delayed by 4 years, so as I say, I've got a lot of gaps in the Americas. I've been to a fair number of places, but there's a lot I don't know. And actually, I probably would be very critical about America, probably more than any other country when I get there, because there's lots of bad news coming out of
Yeah, yeah.
the way the whole setup is. It's sort of like a microcosm of all that is bad in the world, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I guess at least you've got a title already, just slagging off America. You can just go with that.
Make America shake again or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's yeah.
no,
Sorry.
sorry, go on.
No, I've finished more or less.
So, I was before I ask you where people can sort of, you know, keep up to date with what you're doing and stuff, because I know you're on Twitter.
Yes.
One thing that I wanted to ask is quickly about, because we have spoken a tiny bit off the recording and sort of in private message about, you mentioned that recently Stop Having Kids had their Instagram
Yes. Yes.
account
Yes. Yeah.
censored,
Yeah.
and um obviously, you know, you have, well, I guess we all have some skin in the game because, you know, we're all online now, but
Yeah.
you know, you also use the internet as a medium for getting your work out there, your books out there.
Yeah.
So what are your sort of, why are you so concerned with the direction that online privacy or censorship is going? And so two parts. Why are you so concerned about this? Why do you think it's important?
Mm.
And then second part, why specifically do you think antinatalists should be concerned with this?
Well, I think I've already mentioned to you that I've been banned from Facebook. I think I
Mm,
told you that, and they've been getting at me for the last 2 or 3 years. They'll ban you for a month, or they ban you for whatever, and eventually they permanently ban you. And I just think that is totally undemocratic. I think
mm,
it's discrimination, and yet they just get away with it. And I know that with Stop Having Kids, you know, they were most popular on Instagram. I don't know. I have actually still got an Instagram account. Zucker didn't ban me on that as well, but I don't actually use Instagram much. I just it's not really my scene.
mm,
I have to. I limit myself to social media. I'm not going to go on every damn thing going.
mm,
Um, but they were banned on Instagram, and I think there's a general trend of antinatalists and vegans being censored on the media, on things like Facebook and Twitter. Actually, funnily enough, I haven't had any problems at all. So
mm.
although Elon Musk and his 10 kids isn't really what I approve of, at least he doesn't seem to be, or the organisation doesn't seem to be targeting people, or it certainly hasn't targeted me in any way whatsoever. And I put very similar content on Twitter than I have on
Mm.
Facebook.
Yeah, it's interesting how, sometimes all of the social media platforms, they all sort of sometimes walk in unison.
Hmm.
So, for example, probably the most famous example is Andrew Tate. I don't know how much you know about him, but he
He doesn't seem to be a very nice piece of work, but I don't know that much
no,
about him.
yeah, exactly. Well, no, so he doesn't seem to me like a nice piece of work either. But he was an example of.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure every social media platform banned him
Yes,
basically
yeah.
in the same week.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
they clearly have the ability to
Oh,
work
oh,
in
yeah, they're
unison.
all in cahoots together. That's what I
Yeah.
thought. But sometimes they'll do things separately, and sometimes perhaps they won't. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's interesting how sometimes they work in unison and then sometimes they are differently. So how you were treated differently on Facebook to
It was
Twitter to
Twitter,
Instagram to whatever.
and Instagram. I say I hardly post on Instagram, so they probably just left it.
Mm.
I don't really use it that much, but yeah, Stop Having Kids. I think they're going to have their own. From what I had an email from them recently, and they said they're going to have their own social network, which I think
Yeah.
might be the way forward, because then you know that you're not going to have somebody pulling the plug on you.
Mm.
You can
Well,
be more forthright,
yeah,
hopefully.
no, I get what you mean. They I mean I don't know if you're referring to something else, but they recently set up their own Discord
Yes,
server.
yeah.
Um and I don't know how familiar you are with Discord,
I'm
but
not familiar with it at all.
yeah, it's like Twitter in that there's a company that owns it, but
Mm,
it's completely different from Twitter in terms of the format, like the way you
right, okay.
interact with people and the layout and stuff, and
Yeah.
the function of it
Mm,
is completely different.
mm,
But no, I agree with you. I think all of this reliance on censorship to solve what people see as issues, although a lot of the time I don't think they're issues. I think it's
mm.
just people expressing an opinion that
Yeah, yeah,
someone else doesn't like.
yeah.
And it's
Exactly. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, and it's like, well, okay, well, the world doesn't revolve around you. So if you don't like what they're saying, just don't listen to them. And,
Exactly.
you
You
like,
can turn,
there is a
you
block
can turn
button.
the television off. You can turn your mobile phone off. You can turn your
Hmm.
computer off.
Exactly, yeah. But no, I agree with you. I think it's a wider issue of this increasing trend towards censorship. But I guess humans have always done it, and they're always going to do it, which is sad. But I think it's something that antinatalists specifically and vegans should
Yeah, I'm
be
sure
wary of.
I'm sure that the antinatalism and veganism has played into their game, that they don't like
Mm,
that sort of. aspects, and they don't like people, expressing those sort of views.
Mm.
Maybe I probably said a few nasty things about Zuckerberg as well, but not sort of, I'm not putting violence there. I'm not saying, oh, Zuckerberg should, you know be attacked or anything like that. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not. I'm not putting. I'm not threatening him in any way. I might say he's an arsehole or something like that,
yeah, yeah.
which he is. Um, but I'm not making there's no threatening behaviour,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think he's a nasty piece of work.
Mm.
But I don't know. I think it's the antinatalist message they were trying to shut down in some
Mm.
way. But they won't attack the antinat directly. They'll do it as a side sweep.
Yeah, yeah. No,
They
I get what you
actually, they
mean.
actually, they actually, that the final thing that did it was I actually posted a picture of Donald Trump, a Donald Trump lookalike, being spray painted orange, and it was a joke, it was a laugh, and I was permanently banned because of that one thing.
Yeah,
But obviously, there's all the other issues beforehand. I think,
yeah, yeah,
well,
yeah.
why ban me on something? And they said, oh, I think they said it was nudity or something, but the whole genital area was pixelated out. And
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
his top was bare. He had bare. It wasn't Donald Trump anyway. It was a Donald Trump lookalike.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and then they banned me for that. And it's just a joke.
Yeah, yeah. No,
That's
no, I get you. I get you. I think a lot of people have made jokes and they've just been misinterpreted, and then people have been banned for that.
they can't
Um,
they can't handle satire or
yeah, yeah.
irony, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyway, so talking of social media and everything, where are people best to sort of keep up to date, or if they want to contact you or keep up to date with you generally? So obviously, you have a Twitter. I'll include a link to that in the
Yeah,
description.
Twitter is probably the best.
Mm,
I'm on LinkedIn as well. Um, I'm on YouTube. I have a few YouTube videos, but you can contact me on not that many YouTube videos, but yeah, I've
mm,
got a few YouTube videos. So, but it's mainly Twitter. I'm saying I'm not very that active on social media at the moment
mm,
because obviously with my Facebook, um, I'm on Instagram as well, but I don't use it much.
yeah.
Have you got Telegram? Because some people have recommended Telegram. I'm not quite sure whether that's a good idea or not.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it, but I only use it for direct messaging people,
No.
and even then, very occasionally.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, when it comes to public figures being on Telegram, I don't fully really know how it works. I don't follow anyone on Telegram,
Right. Okay.
so it's one of those platforms where or messaging services where I'm not as familiar with it, even though I
Mm.
have it.
Mm. Yeah. So I'm not. I wouldn't say uh, I'm on that many sites, but yeah, I go on YouTube and so you can always contact me on there. But
Mm.
yeah, Twitter is probably the best.
Cool.
Best.
Well, I'll link those, and I'll also put the link to
Yeah.
to Amazon as well, so that people can.
Yeah.
It is Amazon the best place for people to get your books?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, yeah. So I'll
Yeah.
put it on there as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But yeah, probably best to leave it for just a 3 or 4 weeks while I sort
mm,
out just a few issues with inside the book, which I just was making some amendments and just getting the cover,
yeah.
because the cover is not very good and it's got to,
Well,
got to be
and
improved.
and that's why everyone needs to go over to Twitter so they can hear about when
when
when the book
eventually,
is ready.
yeah, when eventually it's finalised. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
hard. It's got me through the pandemic, because that's what I've
Mm.
been doing the whole 3 years basically is writing this book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's got me through. And the pandemic, well, that's another issue which I could go on, but
Yeah, yeah.
that'll be a good couple of hours on that one. And I also
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mentioned that in the book at the end. There's some appendices at the back which I've included things on antinatalism and then on COVID, and what else have I got in here? Yeah, the March of the Covidians and a section on Facebook and Amazon bullies,
Oh,
because
really?
Amazon
Oh,
also have actually censored me sometimes when I write a review on a book, and that they don't like it. They seem to be
mm.
really quite draconian.
And that's all in the Dark Heart of Humanity book that you
So
put
yeah,
those
I
in.
put some appendices. So it's every one of my books is always slightly different, and this one has some appendices at the back where I've done various because it's not just about traveling for Africa. There's a lot
Yeah.
about traveling for Africa and what I've done, but
Yep.
also on general topics, antinatalist topics. There's one on here on assisted suicide,
Okay.
and on the COVID, Facebook and Amazon bullies, on discrimination against the child free and antinatalist. So there's a range of things which I thought were quite interesting, which
Mm.
actually will give a bit more flavour to the book.
Mm. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to reading it. To be honest, I used to like over the in 2022 I read quite a lot, but
Yeah,
it's sort of tailed off now. I need to get back into it. Um, but cool. So I'll include all those links so
that's
people can
brilliant. Yeah,
find them
thanks. That's great. Thanks.
in the description. But I think that those are all my questions. It's been like
Okay.
really interesting talking to you. It's one of those things where like different things intersect with different things and cross over, and I never thought I would have a conversation about antinatalism and traveling the world.
Oh,
There
okay.
there are two things where it just didn't occur to me that
Right.
there would be someone who crosses over, and then um Marcus, who you spoke
Yeah,
to when you did
Marcus,
the species
who's the
barrier.
sort of linchpin really to all this.
Yeah. He was the person that put you on my radar, and then as soon as I heard, and I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting, those two things crossing over." So
Because
I
he's a
like
great
really
reader
want
of books, and I've been in touch. I've been, kept in touch with Marcus for a long time.
to.
Yeah, so yeah, very interesting. So
Mhm. But thank you so much for
thank
coming on.
you.
I've
Yeah,
really enjoyed
thank
it.
you for having me. Yeah.